Your Heart is about to be performed in Brighton and London. Nathan, what's it all about?
It's basically about two older gentlemen who fall in love in a care home. It's essentially a love story, but it's also it's kind of bittersweet comedy. I suppose I wrote it because I heard it was quite a few years ago now. I heard a documentary on the radio about older LGBT people going into care homes, and the fact that quite a lot of them were going back into the closet when they went into that context because they didn't feel comfortable with being themselves, really, around both the other residents and sometimes the staff as well. So I wanted to write a story about someone who simply refused to be anything other than who they were. Someone who'd been a gay rights campaigner, and that was when I came up with the lead character, who's called Joan, a gentleman called Joan.
So why did it take you so long from that idea to get it to the stage?
Why did it take so long? It was nothing to do with me. It was.
I wasn't blaming anybody. I was just curious.
So I had the idea, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, and I first wrote it as a film, as a feature film, and that was read in a private reading at Soho Theatre with actors including Richard Wilson, Nina Wadia, Betty Bourne, and Chris New, who'd just done Weekend at that time. And they all loved it. That was great. And I got all that together mainly with the help of my casting director friend, Gary Davey, and Soho Theatre helped as well. And then I spent years trying to raise the money for the feature film, and we didn't really get anywhere. We tried absolutely everything. It's very, very hard to raise money for a feature film if you're a first-time feature director. I mean, I've made many short films, but it's still quite hard to convince people, both publicly and privately, to part with their money. And even ultra low budget feature films, you're still dealing with quite a significant budget, much bigger than, say, putting on a theatre a run.
Is this because old gay people are not sexy?
That isn't what people said, but I think there is some of that. The film investment market is very conservative. So there has of late been quite a number of older films that are focused on older characters. You look at Best Exotic Marigold Hotel and all of that, with sort of straight love stories at the centre of them. But to my knowledge, there's not been one with an older. We've seen films with older gay characters in, but there's not been a film which centres on two older men.
I was curious because most of them have just been documentaries about how some of them.
Yeah, there's certainly been documentaries.
Your SWANSONG is starring the legendary Lavinia Coupe. How on
Lavinia absolutely hates being called legendary. He's fine with legend because it sends it up.
My next bit of the question was, how on earth would you describe her to my global audience who may not be familiar with her?
Lavinia is was in the Blue Lips, who were a cult gay theatre troupe in the 70s, 80s, and into the early 90s. Lavinia has also been a solo performer since then, and Lavinia manifests as a man in everyday life, and on stage, Lavinia, these days, that is, I'm not sure that was always the case back in the 70s and 80s, when Lavinia was involved in radical drag with the Blue Lips and street action and that sort of thing, because Lavinia's always been very active in gay lives.
Quintessentially English, right? And in my mind, she's like David Howard. She's like the grandmother of the current drag scene, alternative drag scene that you have in East London.
Yes, I think that's maybe the great aunt or something like that. But yeah, certainly there's a relationship. And I think Lavinia's also quite in touch with the. I know Lavinia's working with some of the younger generations of drag performers, if you will, who are making stuff. He's involved in a Christmas show with Ginger Johnson. He made a show with Ginger Johnson earlier in the year. So he's working with him quite a lot.
It's like your husband, the writer Justin David, you're not just content with having one project on the go. You are the co-publisher of Incandescent Press. Can you explain to us why you two started that?
The first book we published was one of our own, so it was Justin's photography and my poetry. And we started the press. We got an Arts Council grant to do it, to make this book, and we decided to start a press because we were fed up with people saying no to us, basically. And I had the whole experience with trying to raise the money for the feature film, and there were a number of other projects where I was just getting a lot of no's for a long period of time. And so we decided, well, sod this, we'll make it ourselves. And then from that, we then decided, well, actually, we'll publish other people's stuff and make this, we'll actually found a proper independent publisher. So we have published, we also published Justin's novel, obviously.
All queer writing?
Not just queer writing, but writing that isn't represented in the mainstream, that is more, I don't really want to use the word niche, but it's just unrepresented. The principal focus has been on queer, but also, women and, BAME. It's always really hard to say, BAME. That sort of thing.
And your Foreign Affairs opens in November at the Etcetera Theatre in London. What's that about?
Foreign Affairs, that's my first solo show in a while. So that's part of a European theatre festival that's happening in London at 3 different venues for 2 weeks in November. It's a show, it's about Brexit. It's about, because the final deal, whatever it ends up being, will be finalised around then, if they come to a deal, at the end of October, November. But I'm using the breakup, or my father's leaving of their 40-year marriage, as a sort of metaphor. So my father lives in Brittany in France. He's British, but he's lived in Brittany for about 15 years, and also supports Brexit, as do all of his expat British friends, which I'm sort of trying to get my head around in the show. So it's about, I suppose it's about the divide between generations and families, and I'm trying to bring that sort of universal element, because I think lots of people have found themselves in that situation where members of their family have been on one side or other of this divide, and I don't really look at it as a divide. I look at it as shades of grey, I suppose, and I'm trying to explore that through my own personal experience of having through mediating that breakup, sort of, to draw a parallel between our breakup with the EU. It's also, there's quite a lot of comedy in that, if not in the Brexit situation, there's not so much in family story. Yeah, there's quite a lot of dark humour.
Okay, we need that. And you've also developed and directed Flights of Fancy, which tells the true story of the artist's journey from Korean refugee, which is obviously not you, to international cabaret performer. So let's talk about that then for a moment.
So that's a show that I created with my friend Veronica, who's Fancy Chance is her performing name. So she was abandoned in a box outside a police station at 3 months in Korea.
You're making this up. You're making this up.
No, this is the real story. She was then adopted by an American woman who lived just outside Seattle. She was brought up there, and then when she was in her late 20s, around 30, she fell in love with an Englishman. She married an Englishman and moved to London, which is when I met her about 12, 15 years ago, something like that. So we make the story is. The show is about her life story, but it's told sort of elliptically through lots of different characters, and it's about now. It's about global migration and politics. It's a very feminist piece, as well. So I've directed it, she performs it, and we've sort of written it together based on her love.
Is it tough, or is it a sheer joy being a queer writer these days?
The writing itself isn't tough.
Mm-hmm.
As I've described, I think the fundraising for projects can be tough. I think opportunity can be quite hard, scant on the ground. Opportunity in some areas, like on the performance and cabaret circuit, that can be quite easy to make stuff happen on relatively. But if you're looking at larger scale projects like theatre projects and film projects, that's a lot of hard work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think queer work probably finds it harder because people assume that the audience is smaller.
Where's the role of queer writing in today's political climate?
Well, I think, the whole thing of queer as opposed to gay, if you will, is that the queer is somewhat other, is something of an outsider.
Yeah.
And I think that's always a useful perspective to look at politics as they are. I mean, if you go back to Shakespeare, the kind of the fool, the outsider, the queer sort of figure is always the one who's commenting on, the big fuck up that King Lear is making. I think a queer perspective is a very valid one within the current political. I'm talking about the larger political rather than just gender politics.
Should it be louder?
Of course, it should be louder. It should be, it should be amplified. It should be projected on the skies. But is it louder? I think it's louder than it used to be.
Good.
I do think it's louder than it used to be. I don't know what someone like Lavinia would say about that, who's always been involved in queer theatre and performance. It would be interesting to ask.
What's next for SWANSONG, by the way, after Brighton?
We're inviting lots of programmers and producers to those showcases, and the plan is to get a tour together for 2019.
Dare we ask what's next for you?
What's next for me?
I don't have the time.
Lots and lots of sleep.
What is there one in? Oh, really? What's it like having a queer artist as a husband? Competitive?
Well, he's not strictly speaking my husband, but we can use that as a term. Can use that as a term of phrase. It's a roller coaster. An emotional roller coaster. Actually, I should probably at some point lift this camera and show you the picture above my head. But
okay, I think that's a very, very good note to finish for our interview and for your relationship.